The voting will take place today. Will the Raiders end up in Costa Mesa for training camp? That plus a whole lot more comes up on Tuesday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for May 7th, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. As always, if you're giving us a look on YouTube, we appreciate that. The show is growing each and every day. That's because of you and Ari. Ari does a fantastic job each and every day making sure we're on YouTube, we're looking good, we're sounding good. And, of course, Raider Nation, without your support, it wouldn't even matter. So shout out to you, Raider Nation. Shout out to Ari. You can check Ari out on Twitter at Ari Produces. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254 and 707-654-4693. You want to be a part of the show? You want to get your feedback in? We can do that. It's the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. Again, 707-654-4693. That feedback comes up in segment number 3. Got a lot of calls and texts. We'll try to get through as many as possible. Segment number 2, want to continue to talk about the Raiders draft class, and many different outlets are continuing to show some love to the Raiders and Tom Telesco for what they were able to do. Now, there are some out there that are just flat out saying, oh, it was a bad draft, and not really seeing the rhyme or reason that Tom Telesco came up with. But for the most part, the reviews of the Raiders draft class in 2024 have been pretty positive. I found another one from Pro Football Focus. We'll go over that, talk about it in segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, news and notes of the day, as I always do, and we'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is Monopoly Go. I laugh when I say Monopoly Go because, well, we all know, I've admitted it already, being very, very competitive, and my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. That's the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. You can join your friends and download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. So off top, today is the day that the Raiders training camp in Costa Mesa goes into effect, or not goes into effect, but takes a vote. There's a vote a little bit later on this afternoon. My guy Vinny Bonsignor from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, of course, the Raider Nation Radio's Morning Tailgate as well. As soon as the morning show is over at 10 a.m., is actually going to drive down to Costa Mesa so he can be there for the vote. And I'll just be 100% honest. I think that this is a formality. I think that they just have to go through with it, but, having the vote to make sure it's official. But look, the mayor has already basically welcomed the Raiders to Costa Mesa. So once it becomes official, like a referee's whistle, we'll go through and talk about, what it's going to do, what it means for the Raiders, what it means for the community, what it means for the youth, what it means for the sports complex, everything going on there in Costa Mesa. But it looks like that they're going to be using the Jack Hammett Sports Complex for their 2024 summer training camp. If you missed what the mayor said, he said, "I'm pleased to welcome the Las Vegas Raiders to the great city of Costa Mesa for training camp this summer. The Raiders and Costa Mesa share a commitment to excellence, and our partnership will greatly benefit the community." So we'll get deep dive into all of that. I mentioned it on Monday's show. I do think it's a positive that they're going to be going to Costa Mesa. If they, in fact, do that, I think it would be good for team building and bonding. I think that they'll be able to get focused on just football and kind of get away from the everyday scuttlebutt of what's going on around home, even though the Raiders facility is a really nice facility, right? That's one of the big, exciting things and features about the facility is how nice it really is. And so even though they have that nice facility, I think it's good to get away from campus every once in a while and have a training camp away so they can, like I said, continue to bond and build and focus in on football. And I don't care if it's Costa Mesa. I don't care if it's Napa. I don't care where it's at. I just think it's a good thing. Plus the heat, obviously, won't be that hot there in Costa Mesa when it's right around the corner from the ocean. So that'll probably be fun for the Raiders to get away from that as well. So that'll take a vote today, later on today, and then we'll find out the results of that. Also, the Raiders made a signing official. I talked about it on Monday's show. Wide receiver Jalen Guyton. I learned over the weekend that he was, in fact, signing with the Silver and Black. He's a guy that visited last week, and there was no word on what was going on with him. But then again, over the weekend, as I mentioned on Monday's show, found out that he was officially signing. And, man, the Raiders didn't take any time. Around 9 a.m. Pacific time, all of a sudden the email came through about Jalen Guyton officially signing. I didn't know when it was going to happen, if it was going to be Monday, if it was going to be Tuesday, or whatever the case may be. But nope, they made it official like a referee's whistle super early. It put out the email saying Guyton joins the Silver and Black after spending the last 5 seasons with the Chargers. Last season, he played in 8 games, had 10 catches for 89 yards and a touchdown. So obviously not very much production, but he's been around the team, been around the Chargers and around the league for a while. He's 6'1", 212-pound receiver, signed with the Chargers as an undrafted free agent back in 2019, and has played in 46 career games, 14 starts since entering. He owns 71 catches for 1,112 yards and 7 TDs. He's also added 34 rushing yards on 9 attempts. So a guy that Tom Telesco is very familiar with, another guy that is added to that wide receiver room, a guy that's got plenty of speed, and not only that, that's going to just provide more competition. Michael Gallup was signed last week. Jalen Guyton signed on Monday. Of course, they've got Devontae Adams. They've got Jacoby Myers. They've got Hunter Renfrow. They've got Brock Bowers. They've got Michael Mayer. I mean, they've got a lot of pass catchers in that room there. And so the offense is going to be given so many times and so many opportunities to really build and be the strength of the team as opposed to the weakness that it was in 2023. And now, make no mistake about it, I still believe the defense will do all the heavy lifting, but it's just nice to see that more weapons are being added around Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. And remember, it's a 90-man roster. It's not a 53-man roster. Right now, all you got to worry about is building competition, and that's exactly what you want. Now, when training camp's over, the preseason's over, it's all said and done, okay, now you got some tough decisions to make, and that's what you want. You're hoping that by the time training camp and preseason's over, that we're on this show that we call the Locked On Raiders podcast saying, man, the Raiders are going to have some tough decisions at wide receiver, at cornerback, at offensive line, at whatever the case may be, right? Like last season, it was a lot of the wide receivers and it was a lot of cornerbacks. There was some real tough decisions that had to be made. That's what you want. You don't want there to be a no-brainer like, oh, that guy's cut, that guy's cut, that guy's cut, that guy stinks. Like, you don't want that situation. You want as much healthy competition as possible, guys that end up getting released from the Raiders and get picked up elsewhere and playing. That's what you want. Not that you want to give talent away, but you just want to know that you have some really good, talented dudes in your locker room that, well, you can't possibly keep all 90. You can only keep 53. So Jalen Guyton added to the mix. Also, the Raiders on Monday came to agreement on terms with offensive tackle / guard Andrews Pete, formerly of the New Orleans Saints, and he has been confirmed to agreeing with the terms pending a physical, and he will be listed, as I mentioned, tackle guard. He's got the versatility to play both. Catherine Terrell from ESPN tweeted out after the news broke, Pete came back last year on a pay cut, lost his starting job at left guard to James Hurst, and ended up back in the starting lineup at left tackle in that same season. Pete's flexibility really helped with after the offensive line had a rough start to the season. He became a free agent after his contract voided. So that was from Catherine Terrell from ESPN on Twitter. Also, Ian Rappaport from NFL Network, one of the first ones to put out the news about Pete agreeing to deals, said he's 30. He had a 60.2 overall grade per Pro Football Focus in 2023 with his play at left tackle, leading reason he was ranked 92nd in Greg Rosenthal's top 101 free agents. So not a guy that's just a fantastic player and, just a huge upgrade to the offensive line, but another guy that's added for depth along that offensive line and competition. And that's going to be the biggest word, especially with Antonio Pierce as the head coach. He's going to look for competition all the time. That's exactly what he wants, and we feel pretty good about the offensive line. You know what Colton Miller is. You know Dylan Parham. You know Andre James. You know Jackson Powers Johnson, JPJ. He's going to be added to the mix. So really the competition is going to be at right tackle, Thayer Munford, Dalton Wagner. You've got now Andrews Pete, right? I mean, there's multiple guys that you have there. DJ Glaze, the rookie out of Maryland. I mean, he's a guy that can compete for that spot as well. Of course, you've got others, a guy like Cody Whitehair, who could play the guard position, play that left guard position, provide some competition and depth. That's what you want as well. So if guys don't make the starting lineup, that's okay. If something happens in a pinch, they can slide in. The fact that they're going to have three centers on the offensive line starting, to me, is a really good thing because any of those guys are interchangeable just in case something were to go down. And, of course, they have to have depth as well. So, Pete can help out. He might end up being the starter. Thayer Munford might end up being the starter. DJ Glaze might end up being the starter, but he'll be able to help out, provide competition. And just like I said about Jalen Guyton, when you're looking at a 90-man roster, that's what you want. You want all the competition in the world, tough decisions when it's all said and done. So that should become official once he passes his physical. But we do know for a fact, we were told by the Raiders that he did agree to terms with the team, and it was pending a physical. So look for that official news to roll out sometime today. But that's what I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, news and notes of the day. Coming up in segment number 2, we'll continue to talk about the Raiders draft class and what Pro Football Focus had to say in multiple different angles about their draft class. We'll do that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we do that, though, we got to put the show on a pause. Why do we got to put the show on the pause? Because of a game that I really like and I've been talking about a lot. It's the title sponsor of the show, which is Monopoly Go. And I know you're saying, Q, you talk about them all the time. You talked about them earlier in the show. Right. But there's so much good stuff in this game. We got to run it back. We got to talk about them some more. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments. You work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more great prizes you can unlock. And a whole lot more from there. And there's all kind of different prizes that you can get. There's cool playing pieces. You could travel the boards. You could talk trash to your friends, which honestly is my favorite part of the whole thing, is just being able to talk a little bit trash. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every single day with constantly changing tournaments and challenge. A ton include their own unique mini games. You can dig for treasures. There's robots that are involved. There's all kind of different elements to this. Plus, there's always new timed events that help you win big. Massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. Always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench, aka the couch. Go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game is on. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to talk about what Pro Football Focus had to say about the Raiders draft class. And I've been doing a lot of this research and talking to a lot of people on my radio show on the daily. Just what do they think overall Tom Telesco did and what he was trying to build. And, of course, the biggest conversation is, but the Raiders didn't come away with the quarterback. So some people look at the Raiders and some outlets look at the Raiders and say, you didn't get a quarterback, so you don't have nothing. Others, like myself, look and say, but they got some really solid players that they can help build this team. And, oh, by the way, Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew can help you win games. So I wanted to go over a couple different elements and different angles that Pro Football Focus took when they're looking at the Raiders draft class. And the first one really is it was one big takeaway that they had for every single team. So when it got to the Raiders, they said they didn't get a quarterback, but they added offensive cornerstones. I like that. So when all was said and done, the Raiders were the team left out of the quarterback carousel in the first round of the draft. But they responded by selecting the class's premier tight end in the class and arguably the best offensive lineman in the class with their next 2 picks. Think about that. When was the last time, and we went over the 33team.com's grades for the Raiders on Monday's show, they were both A's for the first 2 picks, Bowers and Jackson Powers-Johnson. So those are 2 really good picks that clearly a lot of outlets really like, including Pro Football Focus. They responded by selecting the class premier tight end in the class and arguably the best offensive lineman in the class with their next 2 picks. They said either Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell is going to love throwing to the former Georgia Bulldog, Brock Bowers. 2-time John Mackey Award winner, is one of the greatest college tight ends of all time. His ability after the catch is reminiscent of George Kittle. He could immediately pair with Michael Mayer to form one of the NFL's premier tight end duos. Now, I know that you could pause and say, but a tight end in the first round, you don't really have to go do that. Again, did you hear what they said? One of the greatest college tight ends of all time. And I know that doesn't necessarily translate to the NFL like they're going to be a phenomenal player immediately, but the expectations are really high. If you're already being called one of the greatest of anything in college, you have an opportunity to do something in the NFL. They also go on to say Vegas also needed help on the offensive line. Second-round pick JPJ should start immediately at right guard. He was college football's best center last season. He also brings ample guard experience and is excellent pass protector no matter where he plays. The Raiders will find a franchise quarterback sometime in the future, but they did an excellent job adding talent elsewhere early in this year's draft. First 2 picks, A's, right? And so, again, really good to see that Tom Telesco and company are getting credit for what they were able to do, even if they didn't come away with the quarterback like we all, at least I did, anticipate they were going to do in the draft. But what they were able to come away with and how they were able to address the offense, I think is going to go a very long way. And so, again, it's not something that we're used to all the time. Me covering the team, me being a fan of the team, it's not always that often where I'm able to look and say, oh, wow, that's a really good review of what the Raiders were able to do in the draft. And I know there's some out there, some outlets that aren't very high on it and want to give the Raiders a D or an F grade, and that's just silly. None of that really makes any kind of sense. I don't mind hearing someone that doesn't quite agree and think that they did fine and did fantastic. That's fine, right? You don't have to be looking through silver and black glasses, but I do believe you have to be fair. And the Raiders did more, in my opinion, than a fair job during the draft. Also from Pro Football Focus, and this was from Trevor Sikkema, best pick from the trenches. He was talking about basically just kind of like scatter shooting and handpicking a couple of really good picks that stood out to him in the draft. And he said, interior offensive lineman Jackson Powers-Johnson. There were a lot of good offensive line selections in the 2024 NFL draft, a class that would be good enough to produce some of the top players at their positions over the next few years. But Powers-Johnson was a major plus pick compared to my big board, as he was ranked 27th and wasn't selected until pick number 44. Despite playing just 1 year as a starter, Powers-Johnson showcased the ability to start in the league at both guard and center, took a strong step in proving that at the Senior Bowl, where he is the best offensive lineman through the 3 days of practice. Considering the value of where the Raiders got him and the projection of a starting role, this one deserved a shout-out beyond the guys who went in the first round. Again, best pick from the trenches, talking about Raiders' second-round pick, Jackson Powers-Johnson, out of Oregon. So again, the guy went to the Senior Bowl, proved what he had to prove, wasn't 100% healthy out there at the Senior Bowl, and was still getting out after it, and was not making excuses, was not saying, you know what, I'm not healthy right now, so I'm not playing at my best. No, he was out there getting after it, proving who he could be, and ends up going to the Raiders at number 44 overall. When I saw him mocked, and I know it's just a mock draft, I saw him mocked in the first round so many different places. I just knew he was going to be a first-round guy, and end up going number 44 overall to the Silver and Black. That's great. Now, if you get those are two day one starters, in my opinion, Bowers and Jackson Powers-Johnson. If you get contributions anytime throughout the course of the year on that offensive line from DJ Glaze, whether he's a starter or he's a swing tackle and he just goes in there, kind of like Thayer Munford did his rookie year, that's production. If you get some production out of Richardson, the 4th round pick, the cornerback out of Mississippi State, that's also production, right? I mean, no matter who contributes outside of the top 2 being starters, that's going to be a plus. Now, again, these guys are going to have to go out there and show their worth. Some of these guys are going to make their mark by way of special teams, like a Tommy Eichenberg, the linebacker out of Ohio State. He'll make his way through special teams originally, right? Trey Taylor, the safety out of Air Force, the 7th round pick. He'll probably do the same thing, get on the field. I mean, all these guys, right? All these guys that aren't guaranteed spots, they'll have to, cut their teeth on special teams, but that's okay. That's what special teams is all about, right? To get you on the field, get yourself on the roster, and then you grow from there. But a guy like Trey Taylor that's got ball skills, you tell me ball skills aren't useful in the league? You saw what the Raiders were able to do creating turnovers in 2023, something that they're not used to doing, something that they hadn't done consistently in I don't know how long. They were able to come up with turnovers in 2023. Makes such a huge difference. Makes that defense and puts that defense where they were in 2023. Hell, they beat the Chiefs on Christmas Day by way of creating turnovers and scoring on top of that. Not only getting the ball back, but taking it to the house. 14 points off defensive touchdowns. That's what you have to do. You got to have that mindset. They're getting the mindset of their head coach. They're getting the attitude of their head coach. They're getting and growing that culture that the head coach produced and started November 1st when he took over as the head coach, or the interim head coach. Then at the time, now he's the full-time head coach. And I really hope that this staff and this version of this staff sticks around for a long time. I hope Tom Telesco is the GM for a long time. I hope Antonio Pierce is the head coach for a long time, because the culture that they're creating right now, I really like. The mindset and the makeup and the attitude and the edge, and insert whatever words you want to, that they're coming into this team with, and they already have in the locker room established, I think is a great culture for this team. But if somebody gets replaced, Telesco gets replaced, then someone else is going to come in with a different philosophy. If Antonio Pierce gets replaced, then someone's going to come in and say, I got to change the culture. And then it's going to start the cycle all over again. I'm hoping that this iteration of GM and head coach really works out, because my big takeaway, even though Pro Football Focus talked about some players that obviously were first 2-round picks that were fantastic, both A's by most people's accounts, I'm worried about the overall picture. And like I said, the culture to me means more. There's a certain type of player that's in that Raiders locker room. I'm hoping that those are the certain type of players that continue to be added to that locker room. And hopefully year after year after year, as this thing keeps building, right, then it won't be a surprise to us when we're talking about a really good draft class. It's something that we're used to. And you start to see that talent continue to build in the cupboard for the Silver and Black. And then all of a sudden, guys could walk, guys could leave in free agency, and it's not a big deal because there's someone right behind them that can replace them. They continue to manufacture, a lot more talent. And then, we talked about compensatory picks. When guys leave, they get picked up by other teams, and then you can get comp picks. And, oh, by the way, quick side note, the players that the Raiders have been signing lately, the Gallups, the Gaitons, the Petes, those guys don't go up against the compensatory pick formula. So that's not going to hurt the Raiders and their comp picks that they're set up for 2025. But that's what I got for you. Little Pro Football Focus, giving some more props to the Raiders and Tom Telesco for their 2024 NFL Draft. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and text draft that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. We'll get to that after I tell you about FanDuel. And right now, the playoffs are alive and well, right? You got the NBA, you've got the NHL. Of course, they had the Knicks were on. The Knicks and the Pacers, they're already into round 2. We saw some Game 7s over the weekend. It is a great time of year right now for the playoffs, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 just to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and a whole lot more. And please believe they have a whole lot more where that came from. So you got to check out FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, it's America's #1 sportsbook. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts draft that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Let's start off with a text from Guareb. Said, our scapegoat every year is injuries. Not trying to be negative, only realistic. When you have two quarterbacks that can't elevate you, end up mediocre teams with elite quarterbacks, have injuries, still make the playoffs, Raiders have to hold their breath and cross their fingers for no injuries. It's not possible quarterbacks that are in the playoffs consistently score 30 touchdowns and up. We have quarterbacks that score 1 touchdown if you stretch it throughout the season. Brock Purdy had 31 TDs. You can add Minshew and O'Connell together, and it's still 8 touchdowns less than Brock Purdy. Don't blame Luke Getsy, who AP wanted, when these quarterbacks don't work. Give him nothing to work with. Give him a 4th and a 5th round quarterback. That's a joke. No excuses with injuries. Good teams don't complain about injuries. They win. That's from Guareb, who, said he's not taking the negative approaches, but it's taking pretty much the negative approach, right? I mean, you're already banking on injuries that haven't happened, and the Raiders do get injuries, but every team in the league gets injuries, and no, you can't blame injuries and lean on that and say, oh, well, you know what, the team was injured. You know, the quarterback, they dealt with injuries last season, and all of a sudden Aiden O'Connell stepped up and actually showed what he can do, right, and got some starts under his belt and showed that he could be a winner. Gardner Minshew was only in for Indianapolis last year because of injuries, right, but he showed that he could step up in a pinch. So, I mean, yeah, are they elite quarterbacks? No. Do I prefer an elite quarterback? Sure. But right now, that's what they've got to work with, right? I mean, did AP want an elite quarterback? Yeah, he wanted Jaden Daniels. We all know that. Wasn't able to get him. So I'm not too sure there was no elite quarterback tree that they can go out back and pick a quarterback from. There just wasn't. Like, there literally was nothing they can do, right? They could have gone and made a play for Kirk Cousins, but did you want a 39-year-old quarterback coming off of Achilles that you had to give $100 million fully guaranteed to? Probably not, right? I mean, that's just the real, realistic. That's not. They gave Gardner Minshew $15 million fully guaranteed, not $100 million fully guaranteed. So, and to be honest, Kirk Cousins hasn't won anything in the league. Only thing he's won is a game of life, cashing checks. He's done a really good job at that. But, I mean, you act like that there was a tree out back that AP and Coach Getsy can go out there and just pick a quarterback. It's not realistic. They had the draft. They tried to get up and try to go get their guy at number 2. Wasn't able to. Okay, they were comfortable with the top 3, right? They were comfortable with Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, and Drake May. Guess what? So were the Bears, Commanders, and the Patriots, who they ultimately went to. And then even the Falcons doubled down and got Michael Penix. And I'm not guaranteed and feel real confident that the Raiders would have even taken Penix at 13 if available. So, look, you roll with what you got, right? I mean, they don't have to be elite. Brock Purdy's not elite by any stretch of the imagination. He's a good quarterback. He's a really good quarterback. I respected him and liked him a lot when he was at Iowa State, but he's not elite. There's only a handful of elite quarterbacks. And when I say handful, very small handful of elite quarterbacks in the league right now. Brock Purdy is not one of them, but he's really good. And the 49ers are lucky to have him. So maybe someone steps up for the Raiders, like Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew, or maybe they just do the best that they can, which I'm sure they will, and then the Raiders go back to the drawing board and get the quarterback that they need and desire a little bit later. That's all you can really hope for. But, I mean, you're talking about injuries already. It's almost like you doomed the season. They ain't even got to training camp yet. That's just me. But thanks for the text, man. I do appreciate you. It's always good to hear from you. Up next, got a call from diehard Raider fan calling from Mexico. I believe that's what he said. He's calling to talk about the quarterback position, and in particular, Aiden O'Connell. Here he is, a diehard Raider fan calling from Mexico.
Hi, longtime listener. Calling from Mexico, diehard Raider fan. Love your contact. I got to tell you, my friend, you're hitting it. A lot of logical facts. The only thing I don't really agree with is AOC stepping forward. The guy's got a noodle arm and it has no mobility. I mean, I hope he does good, but the best we have for Gardner Minshew is just a bridge quarterback. And until we get our quarterback, we're just going to be stuck in mediocrity, and I hope that's not the case. The defense is going to be amazing. We're probably going to lose Patrick Graham after this to a good coach. God, that guy can make us play. But I really want to say thank you for taking the call and listening. Bye.
Thanks so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And, I think O'Connell's fine. He's not elite, obviously. Minshew's not elite either. They'll have a nice training camp battle. It's something that we'll definitely pay attention to. We'll see who actually earns a starting job and who's the backup, right? 1-2 punch. At least both guys are going to be able to be capable of winning games, and the players around them have confidence in them. So the defense, I believe, is going to do the heavy lifting. At least the Raiders, to their credit, are putting a lot of weapons around these quarterbacks. So whoever the quarterback is going to be, whether it's O'Connell or Minshew, they're both going to have an opportunity to survive and thrive because they have really good talent around them. So thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Big Drew in Houston. Yo, what up, Q? Big Drew out of Houston here. Just want to add to a point brought up by Bridget Condon in Friday's show. She said Gardner Minshew had the best passer rate in the NFL last year when it came to the NFL. That's great news when looking at our new and improved tight end room. To add to that, Luke Getsy ran the 7th most 12 personnel formations in the league last season. I don't know about you, but that sounds like a perfect fit to me. Also, I like the comparison you made to Rich Gannon. How cool of a buzz would it have been for Minshew to have picked up the number 12 instead? Anyway, appreciate everything you do. Let's go, Raider Nation. Big Drew out. That's Big Drew in Houston. And yeah, I thought Bridget brought up some really good points when talking about Gardner Minshew and what he was able to do and what his passer rating looked like, and just all that good stuff. And again, it's not going to get anyone super excited because, as I mentioned a couple times so far, these quarterbacks aren't elite. But they know what they can do. Luke Getsy knows what the assignment is, and he's going to have to prove it. Like, he's got a lot on his shoulders as well. He was a guy that he wasn't very good as offensive coordinator in Chicago. AP picked him. He picked him for a reason. He talked to him. He probably shared his idea. I'm sure Getsy shared what his idea was. They probably looked at the personnel. How do you get this offense from being where it was in 2023 to being closer to where it needs to be in 2024, or being exactly where it needs to be? As AP said, he needs to score 24 points, 26 points a game. How do you do that when the Raiders barely got 20 points a game in 2023? That's going to be their challenge. That's what they're going to start working on, and they're going to be working on it. Well, they're working on it right now, but, rookie minicamp starts later on this week. Of course, OTAs, mandatory minicamp will come up, and then, boom, you'll have training camp later on, and we'll see where that training camp is at, if it's at Costa Mesa, if it gets approved today. So we'll find out a little bit later about that. But thanks so much for the text, my man. It's always great to hear from you. Up next, got a call from Darren from the 203. He's calling to piggyback what John and Brentwood had to say on Monday after the draft and the selection of Brock Bowers. Here he is, Darren from the 203.
Hey, Q, it's Darren calling in from the 203 again. And this conversation that I'm going to be having it's piggybacking off what John and Brentwood called in with yesterday with the tight ends. And, he points out Kittle, he points out Kelsey, and them having elite tight ends. So I start, thinking further back into more Super Bowls in the past. Dallas Goedert with the Eagles, the year before. Obviously, Kelsey on the other side. Goddard's no slump. And then even before that, all the Patriots Super Bowls, Gronkowski's in those. But, correct me if I'm wrong, when the Colts were in there many, years ago, they had a pretty damn good tight end, did they not? I don't know if I'm mixing up my timelines. The Saints had Jimmy Graham. Was Shockey still in the league when the Giants were in the Super Bowl? And they won the Super Bowl, one or both of them. But, you catch my drift. When you look further back into, the recent Super Bowls, you see a trend of there being a lot of top-tier tight ends involved in the Super Bowl. Now, this isn't me saying that, we got a top-tier tight end, so we're therefore going to the Super Bowl. And it's also not me saying that's because they have the top-tier tight ends. But I do think that there is something, of value there to think about with how much having that dominant presence over the middle of the field helps a team succeed, right? The Patriots had 73 slot receivers on their roster at any given time because they dominated the middle of the field, and it helped. And, they were joking on the roast of Tom Brady, which was long, but if you can get through it, it was pretty decent, pretty good. But they were talking about how he doesn't throw the ball deep. They can dunk. That's because they just controlled the middle of the field, and they controlled the field itself. But yeah, just taking a look back and seeing the tight ends of the past Super Bowl winners and contenders, there's a lot of elite and top tier tight ends there that goes further back than just these past two teams that played this year. So I think that's really worth note. And it is something that we should, take into consideration. Sorry, I'm cutting in and out here. I'm at a traffic spot, and there's a cop directing traffic, so my brain's getting occupied. But yeah, I think good call in from him. It's definitely started me thinking down this path, and getting me more and more excited with the pick and the future of this team. So that's it from me, man. Go Raiders.
Darren, thanks so much for the call. Appreciate you, man. And I think the 1-2 punch of Mayer and Bowers could be awesome if done correctly. right? Again, that goes back to Luke Getsy. They can easily be the quarterback's best friends, right? You can switch up the formation based off what the defense is showing, so the defense can never really get 100% comfortable. They show one thing, you can switch it up, right? You could do 11 personnel. They show another thing, you can switch it up and do a 12 personnel. There's so many different things that they can do. But again, Luke Getsy's going to be challenged with the task of being able to figure that out and set the players up for success. They've got to go out there and execute. But the coaching staff, the offensive coordinator, the guy that's got experience, the guy that was handpicked by AP has got to go out there and make it do what it do. It's that simple. It just has to be in that kind of order. They've got to be able to figure out how to maximize Devontae, Jacoby, Trey Tucker, right? Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, right? The running backs, Zamir White, Alexander Madison, right? All these guys, Dylan Laube, right? I mean, even him, he's a guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield. There's so many different elements that could be added to this Raiders offense, but they've got to figure out exactly how to do it. Thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. Got time for a couple more. This is a quick text from Mark in Omaha, Nebraska. It says, hey, Q, quick question. What do you think the main roles of Marvin Lewis and Joe Philbin will play for the team? And how do you feel their roles will benefit the team? Thanks. That's from Mark in Omaha, Nebraska. Thanks so much for the text. And one, I think that they're sounding boards. They've been there, done that. They've got the confidence of Antonio Pierce because they know what it's like to be a head coach. They know what situational football looks like. AP can lean on them and say, hey, even in training camp, Marvin, how does this look? Marvin, do you think this is going right? The one thing about AP that I really respect, he's not afraid to ask questions. He's not afraid to ask help. They got so much experience on that coaching staff that can only help. That's to me, that's a big deal, right? Philbin's been in the league for a long time. Marvin Lewis was obviously in the league for a long time and did some great things with Cincinnati, even though they never won a championship. To take that organization where it was, you want to talk about a dumpster fire, change the culture, and get them in the playoffs consistently. I mean, you got to tip the cap to him for that as well. And obviously, AP is very comfortable with them. So, yeah, I think that it's all going to benefit the Raiders, and AP will be able to lean on both those guys quite a bit to get where they need to go and get this team going in the right direction, similar to what he did last year. Remember, he had Marvin Lewis, Tom Coughlin. He had what was the guy that wasn't very good in New York with the Jets? I forget his name now, but you know what I'm talking about. The head coach, the guy that was in Denver for a while as well, the offensive coordinator. I forget what his name is. But anyway, I know he wasn't very good, but he was also a guy that had head coaching experience, and so AP leaned on him. Hey, check out my practices. Check out my meetings. What do you think? Give me some feedback. That's nothing to shake a stick at, man. That's a big deal when someone's able to do something just like that. Thanks so much for that text. I do appreciate you. We'll close out with one more call. Bad Left Gray, I think is what he said, out of Central Valley, out the 559. He's calling to respond to what I said about having an elite quarterback and respectfully disagrees. Here he is, Bad Left Gray, out of Central Valley.
What's going on, Q? This is Bad Left Gray out in California. Just wanted to, on the Central Valley. So anyways, I just wanted to touch bases on the thing you said with having an elite quarterback. Man, I beg differ a bit. I think a solid offensive line and the best defense we could get on the field would definitely put us ahead of most teams. And like back to Rich Gannon days, man, I think that, he wasn't an elite quarterback. He wasn't one of those quarterbacks that, don't get me wrong, he came with us and our offense was tailored to him. Having our, Jay Rice, Tim Brown running those slots or those slants and, just making big plays from there. So I think that honestly, if we can just get the solid D like we're doing, build up our offensive line, have some nice tools on the outside, with our tight end now, Brock Bowers, Mayer, Devontae Adams, Myers, all of these guys, man, I think we're going to be in a real good place, man, whether we have Minshew or Aiden O'Connell at the helm. I think that it's first build up everything else and then go after our elite quarterback if we can. That's, me preferably, if I had a team, which I don't, would be the way I do it. But, man, thanks again for what you do. Go Raiders.
Thanks so much for the call, my man. I appreciate you. And, your approach is definitely an approach, right? We talked about it last week. There's multiple ways to get where you need to go, right? You can get a quarterback and try to build around them, just like what the Raiders are looking like that they're doing. They're going to, well, they didn't get a quarterback. They're building, actually, I should say. They're building right now, and at some point they'll go get a quarterback. Like the Bears, they went out and built the team and then got the quarterback and plopped him in, right? And so that could be similar. And then there's teams like the Carolina Panthers where Bryce Young, they selected him, and now this year you see that they're trying to build around him. So there's multiple ways to do it. Depends on what your philosophy is. I'm sure that the Raiders would love to put their franchise quarterback in place right now, but they weren't able to. So now they're going to try to do exactly what you said. Have the roster built, go out there and win some games, lean heavily on the defense, and we'll see. Now, when you talk about Rich Gannon not being elite, he wasn't necessarily elite, but he was a league MVP, right? And that's nothing to shake a stick at. I mean, to be a former league MVP, that's a big deal. So I'll say that there's that. And then you mentioned that you could beat most teams without an elite quarterback. Yeah, you can beat most teams, but can you beat that team? And that team is the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, can you beat them? Those guys are the back-to-back defending Super Bowl champs. Can you beat them consistently without an elite quarterback? That remains to be seen. That's what I'm talking about. You've got to try to build the team to beat that team and beat them consistently. And, oh, by the way, now you've got a tough Chiefs team, obviously. A tough, I would assume, Chargers team with Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh getting together. Denver at some point will be better. I think this division is going to be a really tough division, top to bottom at one point. I don't think Denver is quite there yet, but I do believe the Chargers will be better. And, of course, Kansas City is the defending Super Bowl champs. And, look, I'm not sleeping on the Raiders. I think the Raiders have a great opportunity as well. I think AP is going to be a really good head coach. He's just got to go out there and prove it. So thanks so much for that call, my man. I do appreciate you. If I got your name wrong, I apologize. It sounded like you said Bad Left Gray, but the more I said it out loud, it didn't really sound like that's what it was. But thanks for the call. I do appreciate it. Got a text from Brent B. in Boston. We'll get to tomorrow. Wine Country Raider hit us up with a call. We'll get to that tomorrow. We'll get to more news and notes. We'll know at some point, hopefully, whether Costa Mesa got approved or not. I'm sure it will, but again, we'll know for sure. We'll talk about that. Plus, we'll have plenty of conversation as well here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, and we'll be already on to Wednesday. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.